Okay. Um, we'll try not to go over time because I know people are they
Yeah,
want to throw kavanos at the returns coming in. Whoever it is that's supposed to win.
that's right.
Um, so let's get to the issues at hand. So we've been discussing a very interesting problem. What we do when we have a suffix, we have a doubt, I mean, we have a contradictory narratives. uh, each person claiming ownership, but without evidence. And what we've seen so far is that there are two main Gemaras. One is the Gemara, there are others as well, but the main Gemara is here in the beginning of Bava Metzia, and the other in the Gemara in Bava Basra and Parakeskas Sabatim. Our Mishnah and Gemara is about Shnayim Ochsen Batalis, two people who are arguing over the ownership of an object. In the case in Bava Basra, they're talking about two people arguing over a boat. In our Mishnah, the resolution is Yakloku, which means that they split the the proceeds. Let's say they don't necessarily rip it into two. That would obviously cause a loss. So they split the value of the contested property. In the case of Bava Basra, the conclusion is more radical. Kol de alim gavar. Whoever wins the struggle comes up with it.
The better boxer
To,
wins.
what's that?
I made a joke. The better boxer wins. We had Floyd
The better
Mayweather.
boxer wins. Exactly. So we're surprised by that, and we have to still examine more fully, the parameters of that. Obviously, that's not an ideal solution. Typically, we don't glorify or reward boxing skills, to use your appropriate analogy. So why are we in this particular case, and what are the implications of that? Either way, what we've been discussing is that the Balitosis in the beginning of Bava Metzia and there in Bava Basra and Aflam Dalamid base, and it's also in our Marmakomos. So they ask the question, how come here Yachloku and there called Alam Gava? So the answer that we've seen so far is the position of Rabbeinu Hananel and Rabbeinu Tam, which is there's a difference between a case where two people are not just vying, contesting, arguing over ownership, but they're actually physically, each one has some physical control over the object. That's Shnaim Talis, as opposed to the case in Bava Basra, where the arguments are, strong, uh, but there's no physical control of the object whatsoever. The object is in a neutral place. It's a boat, and it's sitting in the water. It's a piece of real estate, and therefore, it's by definition, nobody has control over it, and consequently, we say that we conclude called the Alam Gam. What we've seen so far is that there are three Rishonim, the Rajbam, Tosas Bava Basra, and Tosas Bava Metzia, that not only explain that the reason we say Achloku here in Bava Metzia is because two people, each one is holding on, but the way they describe it, because again, objectively, if I were to tell you that two people are contesting an object and each one has the same amount of physical control over it, if I were to ask you, like, what is the significance of that, you would be, um, you know, challenged, to give me a clear cut, response. Because in theory, when two people hold on to an object together and they, contradict each other's rights to do that, so this to will make it easy. One option is to say, well, there are two people holding on equally, and therefore they cancel each other out. And it's no different than having nobody hold the object, because there's nothing persuasive about each individual's chelek, in the talis, because the other one has exactly in balance the same evidence or the same factor. So therefore, what they do is they neutralize each other, and it's the equivalent of having no tvisa. That's one possibility. The other possibility, and this is the one that the And we'll see in a moment, that's kind of what the Riva says. The second possibility is to go the opposite. And that's what really the Rajbam and the Rajba, we didn't see the Rajba yet inside, but we will. But we saw the Rajbam and Bava Basra and Tosis and Bava Metzia and Tosis and Bava Basra in three different ways, or three different, on the basis of three different pieces of evidence. What they say is, oh, there are two people holding on. It's the equivalent of each one holding on by himself to half of the object. Because instead of saying two people who are evenly matched in their relationship to an object neutralize each other and cancel out the significance of tvisa, of holding on, what they're saying is, oh, two people are holding on. It's as if there are two objects and each one's holding on to a whole object. Just that whole object is really half of the what used to be the disputed object. In other words, the disputed object is no longer perceived as one integrated whole, half of which is being, tugged in one direction, the other half being tugged in another direction. Rather, the disputed object legally is considered to be like two objects, and that each claimant is as if he's holding on in, exclusively, to his object. So in a way, when we say yachloku, we're not really saying yachloku, in a disputed talus. That's true. That practically, pragmatically, the background is that there's a single object, that both people are making a claim and both people are physically asserting themselves, in a matched or balanced way. That's true. But the legal conclusion, as we'll explain just in a second, is not so much that we're splitting the object in terms of the disposition of the object, as much as we're perceiving this as two different objects, because of the equal tvisos that each have. It's like saying each one has 100% tvisa, right, on half of the object. And therefore, it's the equivalent of having two objects. Now, this idea that just give me one more second, that there are kind of two objects legally, even though physically they're connected and it's one, is especially true for the Rajbam, because what the Rajbam says is that Shnai Moksim Batalis is the equivalent of Zen Notel Ad Yodo, Rajbam Balbasra, Zen Notel Ad Yodo Ad Yodo Magas, the Zen Notel Ad Yodo Magas. Each one in Shnai Moksim is taking the amount that he physically controls. So what we explained last week was this is based on the Gemara in Bava Metzia Zayin Amud Aleph, but the Gemara in Zayin Amud Aleph tells us that the Mishnah is talking about a case where they're holding on to the edges of this cloth, not that each one is holding 50%. But the Rajbam glosses over that as if to say there's no difference between two people each holding the edge and two people physically holding 50%. Now, on the 50%, or on the, let's say one person's holding 30, the other holding 15, and so on, what the Gemara says is that we look, if it's physically in his hands, he physically has control over a certain amount and the other one has physically control of the other amount, then it's as if that object is split up on the basis of the control. So by extension, if the Rajbam thinks that fundamentally there's no difference between holding on to the edges, each one 50%, and a real physical division of tfisa, if he holds that way, then it shows that what he's really saying is that the principle of motzi mechavero alav haraya, the idea that control of the object, right, wins, in the absence of other evidence, that idea is being applied here. Either there is no control because there's a fight over the very object. The solution to that is that legally it's two objects because of this, and therefore each one in control of his, object is the winner. We're plugging in a very, established, principle of law. So that's the Rajbam. Just give me one more second, I'll take the question. Tosis and Bava Metzia and Tosis and Bava Basra don't say it quite as dramatically, but the way that they do say it is sufficient to lead to the same conclusion. Tosis and Bava Metzia uses the expression Anan Sadi, we are witnesses. the my detufis delay, that what each one is holding on to is vadai, is certainly his. And we tried to explain the origins of that statement. It comes from a Gemara, but it's a controversial Gemara. And then the Gemara of the Tosin Bava Basra says, if you were to take more than half away from each of these individuals, it would be like stealing from them. And that's very strange. You have two people who are disputing the ownership of a single object, each one holding on to the edges of it, each one making the claim that he's the owner. And you're telling me that if you give away more than 50% to either one, it's like stealing something in a case where there's only a single person who holds on to the object. So again, the equations made by Tosos and Bava Metzia and by Tosos in Bava Basra and by the Rashbam, each equation is different. Each equation points to the perspective that the two people holding on are not sharing control of the object. Legally, each one's physical involvement has the effect of kind of splitting the object in two and saying there are two, points of dispute here, half number one and half number two. A is in control of half number one, B is in control of half number two, and therefore we're applying the regular view, the regular din of Motzi Mechavar Levarai. However, what I'm going to show you is that the Riva in Tosas Bava Basra, which we're going to turn to in just a second, disagrees. He thinks that Shnayim Oksum B'Talas Yachloku could, or the Achloku of the Mishnah in a case of a dispute, could even take place if there was no physical control whatsoever. In other words, in theory, in the case, I'll read it inside in a second, but first I'm going to take the question. If there was a boat sitting in the harbor, and again, no one has any physical control over it, but you have two claims in court. A says the boat belongs to me, B says the boat belongs to me. So if not for the fact, says the Riva, that one of them is obviously lying, this one says, Zeomar Shalavosai, it's my father's boat, it's a family legacy, I inherited it. The other guy says, what are you talking about? Zeomar Shalavosai, it was my father's boat, I inherited it from him. Meaning they make mutually exclusive claims to the point there cannot be a misunderstanding, so there's got to be Vadai Ramai. Somebody is lying here. So the Riva says, if in that case there weren't Vadai Ramai, even though no one was in physical control, you would still say Yachloku. The problem and the reason you don't say Yachloku is because there's Vadai Ramai. There's certainly a liar here. That's the view. I'm just going to read it in for 1 second, then I'm going to take the questions. But if you look here at Tosas Bava Basra, Lamed Daled Omid Beis, excuse me, and then you skip to about the middle, go down 6 lines down in the middle of the line. It says, Uluriva Nira.
Is that on the source
on
sheet?
page 1. This is on page 1 of the source sheet. Right? Everybody should have the source sheets sent out, I'm sure. Uluriva Nira, the Lav Dafka Ochzin, that actually Yachloku, splitting the disputed object, there's no prerequisite that each one is holding on to it. Really? The Gemara says in Bava Metzia, the Gemara asked the question, we talked about this already. Let's say two people deposit two different items, one worth $100, one worth $200, with a shomer. Right? Ruvain and Shimon hand over their, separate belongings, one worth 100, one worth 200, to Levi, who is the shomer. Okay? And for some reason, there becomes a confusion about the two objects are not equal in value. One is worth $200, one is worth $100. So if there is, and somehow Levi excusably, otherwise it would be his problem, doesn't know who gave him the 200 and who gave him the 100, right? That's called monothuchi. So everybody agrees that each one gave 100, and there's a dispute which one gave the larger sum, the second 100. So the Gemara says that according to Rabbi Yossi, right? Rabbi Yossi was of the opinion, Imkain Mahifsin Aramai. Rabbi Yossi was strong on, law and order and deterrence. So he said, listen, We have to create a situation where there's pain for the guilty party, for the liar. And the only way to do that, is to increase also, sadly, to increase the pain for the victim. So what that means is if there's a $200 object and a $100 object, and we don't know, who's the owner of each, the only way to incentivize the liar to tell the truth, to come forward, would be to take all $300 or the full $300 value and to keep it in limbo. Now, when you do that, you incentivize the liar because he was trying to steal $100, right? But unless he, retracts, he's going to lose $100 himself. On the other hand, you're also penalizing more than necessary the victim, because instead of losing $100, now he's going to lose $200. So it's a choice, right? It's a policy choice and a justice choice. Are you more concerned? Two things. Are you more concerned, shelo yehechote niskar, that the evil, party not get away with it, or are you more concerned with limiting the loss of the victim? Or if it isn't that question, these are related questions, then it's there's a gamble here. We're taking greater risk with the additional loss for the victim in order to incentivize the liar,
But
to
there's
come
a
forward
further
to
problem
save
also.
everybody.
There's a
What?
further problem also in the fact that it's a question of game of chicken, because maybe the honest guy will say, okay, he's right, I'm not, because he wants his 100 at least.
Right, you might make a deal. It's right. If there's no incentive, so then 100%, we're trying to say that, then, we're worried that, in order to
No,
limit,
but if you hold everything back, where the assumption is that the liar is going to say, okay, because he wants at least his 100. But it's also possible that if the person who's supposed to get the 200 is desperate
you're saying
enough,
you're
he
saying
might say,
unforeseen,
okay, give me the 100. He's right, because he needs the $100.
there's an
He has to pay his
unforeseen
rent.
consequence. You're saying it
It's a
does
question, it's a
provide the
game of
greater,
chicken. It's a game of
right,
who's going to need the money
right,
most. And
right.
especially if the Ramai is a better circumstances, he can hold out longer.
So,
No, it's a great point. It is a great point.
but it encourages people to game the system.
What do you mean?
Well, basically,
The goal of Rabbi Yossi is to discourage people from gaming the system. Rabbi Yossi is saying like this: what downside is there for an unscrupulous man to claim that he's the owner of the 200 of the more valuable object? Either way, he's going to get his money back. So it's only a win-win situation, given that he's a liar. He's unscrupulous. So what downside? If you say, well, we know each one has 100. The only question is about the disputed third 100, right?
yep.
So what Rabbi Yossi is saying is he'll game the system. What does he have to lose in lying? And what does he have to gain if he doesn't gain it because it's in limbo? But that's your argument from before comes into that, which is maybe the other guy is so desperate that he'll say, you know what, I don't want to. He's despicable. I'd rather not give in to him, but I'm having economic problems at home, so I'd rather gain 50. I'd rather lose less, but and let him get away with 50 instead of both of us not having the 100. And you say there's a bit of a game of chicken. So what Rabbi Yossi was worried about was gaming the system, and he was trying to provide incentive, for the for the liar, to come forward. But you're right. The circumstances, this can all backfire, as you say. But it's a call. It's a judgment call. You had a question before, also, right?
Yeah. So the other question was really that in the case of a talus,
Yeah.
If
talus is just an example, as we
no, I understand
object, right?
and I appreciate that. But for example, if you have a precious object, for example, and you take something off of it, it loses all its value.
Yeah. So the Gemara says later on Daf Zayin, just to make it clear, the Gemara says, let's say you have an object, and each one's holding on to the edges, right? But there's a particularly let's say it's an embroidery of some sort, or there's gold, in part of it. So the Gemara says, no one really thinks that you're chopping it up in half. What they mean is that you would sell the value, the full value of the object, and you would split the proceeds among the parties. They don't mean divide it; they mean divide the value.
No, I appreciate that, because I think we considered also situations where one of the parties says, I own it more than 50%, but you can't own more than 50% of something that's actually damaged. That's the point. And
what do you mean damaged? Why is it damaged?
Because basically, if he says, I've got 50% of something that is only valuable in its entirety, how can he say that he owns 50% of it?
No, because I'm a partner, let's say. No, we'll get to that in just a second. We're going to get there in 1 second. The second case in the Mishnah is a case where Ruvain says, this whole object is mine. And Shimon says, no, we're partners. 50% is his, but 50% is mine. Why can't the claim be that they're partners?
Yep.
Right?
May I add something, Rabbi?
Sure.
You see, again, last week I said about the Yud Vav Dalet. Again, everything that you've said here tonight can be expressed in the Yud. One person has the Yud, and the other person has the Vav Dalet.
Where's the Yud Vav Dalet that you're talking about?
The what? About the talus.
Yeah.
One person has a Yud, and the other person has the Vav Dalet. That's both of them are 10.
Where do you see Yud Vav Dalet in the talus here?
I see how we split the talus. I see how we split the talus.
Right, but what I'm telling you, we don't really split. We split the value of the object. The object.
Right,
we don't really
both are 10. We're partners. We're partners. I have the Kedusha and you have the Dinam, the Vav Dalet. And now, even in your other example of the 100 and the 200, if I take it off, then I have a 10 and a 20. So one person says the whole 20 of the Yud Vav Dalet, that's 20. The other person says he only has 10 and 10. The point is that what I'm trying to do is to bring this into the letters, to the letter Yud, to bring things into the letters. I mean, that's a high deal.
I hear it. I'm not really sure I understand it fully, but I'm just curious. Where do you get the Yud Daled here anyway? Where's there Yud Daled?
Yud.
In which words?
The Yud Vav Daled. Remember last week I said how the Vav, it's they says this, Zah says this, and Vazah says that.
Oh, you said Zeh, Vazeh, I think you said last week.
Right. Right. The second person is the Vav. The second person comes from the Vav.
It's Zeh Vizeh.
But my point is this: the whole thing can be expressed with the letter Yud.
You're trying to understand it on a different kind of a plane. It could be, but I'm just I'm trying to relate to it more.
I understand. I understand.
Right.
Well, okay. I don't want to occupy this time, but as we go on, we'll see that as the legal problem.
You're right.
Well, it's a yard. We have 2 yards.
I understand. Okay, I hear. There are different ways, different planes to understand things. Okay, so basically, getting back, I'm speaking from the legal point of view. Back to that. So. What I'm trying to establish is that there is one view which says two people who dispute over and share control of an object, we look legally at each one as a full owner of half of the object. That's Tosfos, Baba Metzia, Baba Kama, Baba Metzia, Baba Basra, and Rajbam. And then there is the Riva, very interesting, who says, basically, if two people are holding on to an object, it's the equivalent of nobody having control of the object. And if nobody has control of the object and you're still dividing it, so it's not because they're, the equivalent of two objects, one each in full control of the other fellow. It's more because this is a way that you can, resolve a dispute. When two people argue, there are different ways to resolve the dispute. One way is say, you know what, don't argue anymore. It's not worth the, disharmony. We're just going to split it. I don't think you can do that in a presidential, election, unless you have civil war. But, so then you have to really figure out, who gets control. But yeah, so that's the Rivaz view. That's the view that we read in Tosam al Basra. So now I'd like to highlight it in a way that I think is very interesting. And that if you can all pay attention for the moment, if you can move back to the Gemara on Beis Amud Aleph and the third Tosas, Zenoto Revia. Everybody have that? Now, this is a very interesting case. I think everybody's going to be intrigued by this. I could be wrong, but I'm guessing. So the second case of the Mishnah, I want to highlight this argument in a very...
You have a pretty good track record of being right, so don't underestimate it.
Who has a track record?
You have a good track record.
Oh, wow, thank you. I accept the compliment. I'm appreciative of the compliment. I try. Okay, so the third Tosas deals with the second case of the Mishnah. What is the second case of the Mishnah? One more time, right? So let's look at it. Second case of the Mishnah goes, what is it? It's on the like fifth line. Ze'amar kula shali v'ze'amar chetzia shali. Well, one guy says the whole thing belongs to me, and the other guy says no. I admit that the whole thing doesn't belong to me, but half is mine, half is yours. Like we said a second ago, he says we're partners, right? And the other guy says partners. I'm the full owner. You're not a partner of mine. That's the dispute. So what's the law? Omer kula shali, the one who claims that he's the full owner, right? The exclusive owner, he takes a shvua, she'ein laba pachos mishlosha chalakim. He takes a shvua that says, I don't have less than 3/4, and he takes 3/4. The omer chetzia shali, the one who says, I have half, but I admit that the other fellow has a half. Yishava she'ein la pachos mervia, right? Zenoto gimel chalakim, zenoto revia. He walks away with 1/4. So that's another way of saying that really, since the second fellow's claim is more limited, so the point of dispute isn't really the whole object, right? There's only because they both agree that the first guy has half of the object. The real point of the dispute is on the second half of the object, right? Where each one, claims, that he is a full owner. So instead of saying, each one gets half of the full, we're saying each one gets one gets 3/4, one gets 1/4, but it's really each one getting half of the disputed part. Everybody with me on that?
Yes.
Okay, great. So now comes a famous question of Tosfos, which, is always a real, contentious and lively point of discussion, hopefully. So Tosfos says, V'im Tomar. Everybody see it? The third Tosfos on the page? Tosfos says, Yehi Neman, the Chetzia Shalo, Migu di Bayamar Kula Shali. Right? Kedamin Gemara. Gemara says something similar later on. What's the question? So we have an institution we've talked about in the past called Migu. The word Migu alone is like very innocuous. Migu means because, since. Okay, but this particular because or since, came to signify, a certain, mechanism or a certain, type of argument. So it goes as follows: when a person makes a claim, again, when you don't have evidence, you don't have witnesses, right, and you have claim versus counterclaim, right, and we're looking for daylight. We're looking for some way to clarify, a status or situation, without objective evidence. So one of the things that we might look at is the credibility, or the quality of the argument itself. So there's an institution in halacha called migu. Migu means migu di'i boy amar X neman lomar Y. This came to be known because the first word is migu. Since this person, if he was had the option of making a different claim, so the alternative option that he could have proposed is the reason that we believe him in what he actually says. Okay? What's an example of that? So this is a good example right here, except we'll see. So this fellow, they're both holding on to the talus, correct? If Reuven and Shimon, Reuven says the talus belongs to him completely. Shimon is an interloper. What does Shimon say? No, we're partners. I admit you have a half ownership, but I also have a half ownership, right? Now, if Shimon Shimon had an alternative claim that he could have made, just like Reuven said he owned the whole thing, right? Shimon could have said, I own the whole thing. Now, if he had said, I own the whole thing, what would have happened? He would have collected half.
Chetzi.
Right? That's the first case of the Mishnah. Shnai Mosim Batalis, Zer Makula Shali, Zer Makula Shali, Echloku. Right? Instead, Shimon didn't make that claim. He made, a different claim. He owns half. I own the other half. I'm partners with him. So the question is, why don't you apply the principle of Migu? What is the principle of Migu? Migu di boy Amar Kula Shali. If he had been, we'll say it this way. If he were a liar, he has a better lie. Right?
Isn't there a problem if there's a shvur?
So that's the next line of Tosas. Tosas says, either way you take a shvua, it doesn't matter which shvua.
No,
That's
because
what
for the first shvur, the where he says he only owns
So this is
half,
what, I understand. This is what Tosas says, Kidamrina Begamara, Hai migu gufe, lepatru mishvua, ilo mishum darume kama arim. That's what those words mean. I don't want to get into it right now, but Tosas is discussing
the Gemara goes to pains throughout the Talmud that even when someone's a thief, someone is worse than a thief, but not swear falsely. That he's not going to do.
No, but here, either way, he has to take a shvua here.
But the shvur, if he's telling the truth, let's say he only owns half.
Right. But all I'm saying is, he either way has to take a shvua.
But now the migui basically means I could have said and got away with it. The answer is,
but it's still
not so simple because you have to swear, and you have to.
But either way, you have to swear. Yes. No.
But
no. If there was a migu in which you have a better option or a better alternative claim, but it's also worse because it's a shvua, right? Then that one overrides or one neutralizes the other. But here, either way, you have to take a shvua. So it's not any worse for you, one way or another.
we're assuming in this case that he really owned half the talus, but
Right,
now
no, but if he said that half of it belonged, if he said the whole thing belongs to me, he would still take a shvua that says I don't own less than half. So, right? So that's not a problem. So let's go back to Migu for a moment. I'm going to give the most compelling way to understand Migu is it's not the only way, is that it's a credibility test. Meaning, if I'm a liar, the question, I make a statement and we're trying to figure out, am I telling the truth or am I lying, right? Correct? So what Migu does, Migu is a fascinating institution. Migu says, if you're a liar, you have a better lie. So the fact that you passed up a better, more effective lie to accomplish your goal probably gives you points in terms of being an honest man. If I were a dishonest man, right, then I have a more effective claim to accomplish my dishonest goal. Meaning, take this case. The guy claims half the talus belongs to him, correct? We're trying to figure out, is he telling the truth or not? But if he was a liar, then he could win his case easily by saying the whole thing belongs to me. Then he'd get half. So why not just believe him when he says half? If he could have cheated, so why not assume he's an honest man and then give him the half that he's claiming?
Unless he's a knowledgeable liar.
But even if he's a knowledgeable liar, no, I understand. But even if he's a knowledgeable liar, there still has to be a benefit. If they're both lies, then why not go for the more effective lie? What's the downside, right? That's the idea mostly behind Migu. So here the point is, he claims he owns half of the object. We're only going to give him 3/4 of the object because what we're saying is, that the real dispute centers not on the whole object, but the half of the object. And therefore, Shnayim Bochsim B'Talus Shachloku, and therefore, it looks like 3/4 and a quarter, but it's not really 3/4 and a quarter. It's really half and half, and a half, which is undisputed, right? But Tosa says, why should we penalize him for being an honest man? If he was a dishonest man, then he would win this case easily. So the fact that he's putting himself in a position, to lose is reason to believe that he's honest, and then reason to accept his claim.
But why don't you just say he's ignorant and he doesn't know, and he's trying to get away with something? I mean, if he doesn't know that he could give a better lie to get better.
If he doesn't know, then you're right. The assumption is that when he says, I own half, if he's lying about, the other guy says he doesn't own anything. That's the other guy's claim. He says, I owe half. I don't know the whole thing. We're partners. Now, if he was unaware of the law, that if two people claim whole ownership of a disputed object, that he split it, then you're right. Then it wouldn't be amigo. But assuming that he does know the law, you're right. But if he knows the law and he's proffering an inferior claim, then maybe we should believe his full claim because he's already established himself as an honest man. That's the question. Okay. When I was a young fellow, so somebody asked me this question. We have a rule, Bari V'Shema, I think we've talked about this in the past maybe, Bari V'Shema, Bari Adif. Means that if two people are involved in some sort of a questionable, ownership issue, and one guy says, Bari means I'm certain. I'm telling you this is what it is. Speaks with conviction. The other guy says Safek, Shema. I'm not sure. So there's a debate whether we say Bari V'Shema Bari. Mostly we say Bari V'Shema Bari. If it's against Motzi Mechavero Alavaraya, maybe you wouldn't. But either way, normally, all things being equal, if some guy's claiming, with certainty, and the other guy says, I don't know, you'll give the nod to the one. Why assume anybody's lying here? Like the Shema doesn't saying that the Bari is lying. He just doesn't know, right? So when I was, 10 years old, somebody asked me this question. They said, why is Bari V'Shema Bari Adif? Why do you give the credence to the person who says Bari? The Shema guy could have said Bari, right? So you should believe him, when he says Shema.
Because he had Migu, he could have been a Bari. That's like a Migu.
Migu di Bayamar Bari, believe him. But
leave him on his Shema.
You can't do that by Shema.
It's a trick question.
You
right?
can't do that by Shema. That doesn't hold up.
Right? Why?
Because amigui has to be on a positive statement that a person is making. He's making a lesser positive statement, so you must believe him because
No,
he's the two
I
could
think
be
you're saying
known.
it.
Once
think
it's a
you're right.
Shema, you can't use a Migui because he doesn't even know, he doesn't know what the facts are.
Right. In other words, but just I would say it more simply, which is the idea behind Amigu is not that if you have a lesser claim, you should win. The idea is that if you have a lesser claim, we should believe you more. But if a guy says Shema and we believe him, he's still only saying Shema, right? Which I think is what you're trying to say, but that's I think a simpler way to say it.
Yes.
You know, so meaning Migu isn't a trick that says, oh, you have a better claim and you pass. You don't get a reward of victory because you chose an inferior claim. It's not about reward. It's about credibility. It's about belief.
Subsequently, it is found out that he was lying and there's punishment involved. Would the punishment be greater for the greater amount that he lied about, or would the punishment be less for the lesser amount that he lied about?
Well, put it this way, and if you want to torpedo Amigu, then you always have to find why the alternative Taina has a downside, you know, which makes the credibility boost of the claim that he made not really a credibility boost at all. I'll give you an example, even a psychological example, which we're going to discuss when we get to Daf Gimel Amud Aleph pretty soon. The Gemara says it turned to Gimel Amud Aleph just for a minute. Might as well. If you turn to Gimel Amud Aleph, the Gemara here speaks about motive b'miktzas. What is motive b'miktzas? I claim you owe me $100, right? And so if the guy says, I don't owe you a penny, that's called kofar hakol. He denies the whole thing. And there's no shvua d'oraisa. You don't take an oath minator. You do midrabanan, but biblically there's no oath in that case. However, if I admit that I owe part, I owe 30, I owe 50, I owe 7, doesn't matter the amount. That's called modeh b'miktzas. I admit part. So then you have to take a chiyuv shvua, then there's a chiyuv shvua d'oraisa. Then you take a shvua d'oraisa, biblical oath. So the Gemara says, mipnei ma omra Torah, right? Why is it that motive b'miktzas hataina is obligated to take a shvua? Here, look at the bottom. One second. If I should do this right now. So this is the question, right? What's the basis of the principle, let's say, of motive b'miktzas chayiv and kofar bakol pater, right? So the Gemara says that this principle is based on the following idea. The Gemara says that in the case of a so this is the question. What does the Gemara mean when it says mipnei ma omra Torah, motive b'miktzas hataina yishava? Is on the bottom. Here, just look 4 lines from the bottom of Gimel Amud Aleph, or 3 lines. Toma Rabba, mipnei ma omra Torah motive b'miktzas hataina yishava. Everybody have that?
Yeah, yeah. Yes.
3 lines from the bottom of Gimel Amud Aleph. So the Gemara says, Chazaka eino dameiz panav b'fnei balchov. So the way that Tosas understands this Gemara is as follows. The Gemara is asking, why should a moda b'miktzas not just be believed? Right? Migudi bayamar kofar hakol. Right? The guy says to him, you owe me $100. He says, I owe 30. Right? He has to take a shvua that he doesn't owe more than 30. He's taking a shvua that I don't, but the 70 I don't know. Why does he have to take a shvua? Why not just say, if he was a liar, he has a better lie. He could have said, I don't owe you anything. Right? If he had said, I don't owe you anything, there wouldn't be an oath.
But the whole
Yeah, but it's
And not
harder
only
to make
that,
a
he wouldn't
full
pay a
lie than a
penny.
half a lie.
What?
It's harder to make a full lie than a half a lie. Meaning,
Ooh.
when you say, I don't owe you, I owe you half.
What do you mean by that?
meaning lying on the whole thing, psychologically that's makes you a more bad person.
No, but why don't we just understand
First
that
of all, what you're saying is
there are other rules?
that's the way that's the way Tosis understands
Right.
the answer of the Gemara. So the Gemara says the answer is, this is the way Tosis reads the Gemara. If a guy says, if he's already admitting that he owes 30, when he could have said, I owe nothing, if he'd said, I know nothing, you wouldn't pay anything and he wouldn't have to take a shvuah.
Well, we have to understand that there
Please
are
believe him without, one second, please believe him without the shvuah. The answer is, Chazaka, Eina Ramez Panav Bifnei Bakovo, Bahai Bekula Boy Din Nichbere, Bahai Delo Kafre, the Eina Ramez Panav. Meaning exactly what you just said. Psychology, is also a factor. People aren't so hopefully, right? I mean, there are people and there are people. But normal people, not a sociopath, most people have a conscience. They might be greedy, and tempted, to cut corners or, to do things for financial, self-betterment, but, they have their limits, they have their code. So what we're saying is something called migu de ha'aza, a migu in which you have to be more brazen. If the alternative taina, right, is more brazen than the taina that you make, Jacob, you have to have said it very well. Sometimes a lesser lie is easier for your conscience and easier for your, even
for your guilt.
but
than a fuller lie.
I
So
think
that's not a good migu. Anything that compromises the alternative taina as a basis for establishing a stronger, credibility to the taina that you make, anytime that happens, you've undone a migu.
I think there's also a more fundamental principle. We don't have to go to that. And that is that there are principles. For example, we have chazaka and we have, what's it called again? Rove. Okay. And so we have competing umdanas, so to speak, competing rules of what.
For sure.
So the point is that we can't take any idea and say, okay, because of this, every time a person says this, it depends what other competing general principle we have against it.
That's a great point. So now let's go back to our tosas, because that's the next point. So what are we up to so far? We have this very fascinating institution of migu, right? Which basically means when you have an alternative way to win a case, if you have a better lie, then that's, and you bypass that lie, then that, creates greater credibility for the claim that you make. That's what migu is. And we're asking on the basis of that, why does the guy get only 1/4 when he's claiming half? Had he claimed alternatively the whole, he would have gotten half. So give him the half and believe him. That's a question. So what's the answer? Based on, you'll see in a moment why it's relevant to what you just said. Tosas answers here on Beis Amud Aleph. Yeshlomar, where am I? Farish Rivam, Demigo Lahotzi Lo Amrinon. There is a migu here, but this migu is trying to be motzi mamon. It's not allowing you to defend the status quo. It's an attempt to use the migu to strengthen your credibility in a way that will allow you to change the status quo to be motzi mamon. And migu doesn't have the ability to be motzi mamon. Now, the idea that migu doesn't have the ability to be motzi mamon is a massive argument. The Balitosis throughout Shas mostly have this opinion that a migu can be machzik mamon. It can support the status quo, can allow you to keep something on the basis of a migu, but you can't extract from someone else on the basis of a migu. What's the idea behind that? Exactly what you just said, which is even if migu is an effective vehicle, what happens when it runs up against other principles, right? A chazaka, a rove. Here it's the principle of motzi mechavero.
So by definition,
Raya.
so
that's what Tosa says. By the way, the Rimigash in Masachet Bava Basra thinks that migu, whether you say migu lahotzi or not, I mean, how much strength you give to a migu, can it be motzi mamon? He thinks it depends on the machlokas between, the Amoraim and the Gemara in a certain case. A certain case where, actually, the case that Tosa is about to discuss, I'm going to get to in a minute, on Lamed Beis Lamed Beis, Rav Nachman and Rav Sheshes, they have a certain argument. I'll discuss it in a minute. He thinks that really what they're arguing about is whether migu can be motzi or not, or only machzor. Fine. The Ramban, in numerous places here in Bava Metzia and numerous places in Bava Basra, says, I'm pretty sure the Ramban says that, migu would work lahotzi against the Bali Tosas. Either way, why is this so important to what we've been discussing? Now, of course, this question of migu is always an intriguing question. And whether you say migu lahotzi is an additional argument, but there's a critical implicit connection to what we've been discussing till now, and that is as follows. Is being motzi here, or is he being machzik? Right? What is supposed to say? Migu lahotzi lo minan. Why? The bechetzio hasheni, right? Muchzak zeh kemo zeh. Meaning, there's a dispute here on half the talus, and on the other half of the talus, there's no dispute, right? So when it comes to the disputed half, each one is shnayim ochsim. So when you would apply the migu for the guy who says, you only owe me, I'm sorry, I'm entitled to half because we're partners, although I agree that you're also a partner and you're entitled to half. So what is he trying to do? Is he trying to, prevail and hold on to half? I mean, a quarter, which is half of the half? Or is he trying to take that quarter, half of the half, from the other fellow? The answer is that depends on everything we've been discussing until now, which is two people are holding on to a talis. So what we've been seeing is Mishnah says yachloku. But is that yachloku because each one is ke'ilu holding on to fully to his half, and it belongs to him certainly, and any disruption of that is like taking away his object? Or whenever two people are holding on and rivals about the same object, you can't say that each one is a full owner or a full, toe face of the half, because they're disputing and they're sharing, their tfisa. Everybody with me? So the answer is Tosfos here, in a very subtle way, is totally consistent with the Tosfos before. Tosfos before said that whenever two people are holding on to a talis, we don't split it out of doubt. We split it because each one is certainly, it's like there are two objects, and each one is holding exclusively his half of the object. If that's the case, if you want to dispute that, that's called migu lahotzi. If you want to use a migu to change that equation, then it's that migu is coming to take away what default already belongs from a tfisa point of view, from a motzi mechaber olav haraya point of view, to the other party. And that if you hold ein omer migu lahotzi, then it can't do that because it's against the rule of motzi mechaber olav haraya. But if you held like the Riva, or even like other Rishonim who require Shnai Moksin, but don't think that it's really true that each one is full toe face, an exclusive toe face on his half, let's say there's some sort of mibein shneim, they're both, maybe they don't cancel each other out completely as if there's no machzik, right? But it's a compromised tfisa at best because they're both doing it at the same time, and it's one object, not two objects. So then, is it migul? If one guy says, the strength of my claim in terms of credibility, should be given greater credence, right? And as such, the migu should win me, the 50% of the object, meaning 100% of the disputed part. If we believe him, is that migu lahotzi? No, that's migu. I don't know if it's migu lahachzik, but it's not migu lahotzi, because the other fellow doesn't have a full control tfisa vadai on the 50% of the 50%, namely, the issue, the 25% that we're, weighing here. Everybody with me?
Yes.
So that, we're going to stop in a couple of minutes, but that is the point that is made by the Tosfos Rid. Like, somebody has to be able to say this, right? Whenever you want somebody to say something, like, somebody's got to be making this point. It's usually the Tosfos Rid. The Tosfos Rid had he was one of the Bali Tosfos. He lived in Italy. It was a bit of a different halakhic culture. He has different things bother him, and his some of his doctrines are very innovative and very different. We call him Tosfos Rid, but it's a different school.
From a simple definitional standpoint, very simplistically, a migui is only works. Migui says, I could have said. Only works if I could have said, you could have said. In other words, if there's something halachically that doesn't allow you to reach that.
Right, or psychologically in some cases, or let's say there's an upside and a downside, then you're usually not going to have migu. I mean, there are two perspectives on migu. I don't want to get into it right now. We'll get to it maybe later. I've really been heavily favoring, one, popular view of how migu works. And that is that it's about birur hagavra. It's about personal credibility. It's about, is this an honest man or a dishonest man? By avoiding, a bigger lie that was a more effective lie, he establishes a greater likelihood that he's an honest man.
That's only if he could have said
it.
If
he's an honest man, 1 second, we should believe him. There's another way to look at migu, as the Achronim point out, and that is, it's not so much we believe him more, it's that he has the ability to win this case, albeit with a false claim. That ability already gives him, a certain greater
credibility.
Not credibility, but a certain greater power. It links him, it gives him a stronger connection to the object, because this object is kind of within his reach, a kind of muchzakos. Just like there's a physical muchzakos, where I'm actually holding on to and controlling an object, there's a legal muchzakos, meaning I can win this object in court. I have the means to do that. And if I have the means to do that, it makes me more than simply a claimant. It puts me in a stronger position vis-a-vis this object. Then it's not about the credibility of the individual. It's about the capacity in this particular case to achieve this result. I could get this money, and therefore I have a certain connection to this money. And, that should, be a basis for winning it in the way that, I've more honestly chosen to do so. Anyways, let's look at Tosfos Rid for a moment. So there are two Tosfos Rids. This is the last one. The last, actually, entry in the Marmakobos. We're not done with these Marmakobos. We'll still need the next, because I still want to speak about the Ramban and the Rashba, but okay. Tosfos Rid says, Ha'omer Chetze Shali, if a person says...
Which page are we on now? And the
Page
Mar
4.
four.
To the
It's
last
the
page.
last entry. It says Tosus Rid, Ma second Bamitzia Beis Amid Aleph, but the first words are the Ha'omer Chetzi Shali Yishava. The last one, the last entry. Everybody have that?
I think it's the next to the last page.
No, it should be the last page.
Hmm.
There are two of them in a row.
I mean, I got a little bit extra, but okay.
Print out, it comes out the
No,
high.
no. There are two Tosus Rids, two different pieces.
Yeah, but this one is Baba Mitzia Daf Beis Amid Aleph, no?
They're both Bamitzia Beis Amid Aleph. They're two different comments. You see the second one, the last one?
Yeah.
It starts with Omer Chetzi Shali. The last, it should be the
that's-
last entry on the Marmakomos. Okay. So Omer Chetzi Shali Shavash Pachas Miravia, based on the Gemara. So this is Tosus Rid raises the same question. Ikasha likach chetzia. He should be able to walk away not with a quarter, but with a half. Right? Ayudei migu, on the basis of the device or the mechanism of migu. Migu di boy amar kula shali, since he could have said, if he was lying, he could have had a lie that would have been more successful. It would have given him half of the ob. He could have said kula shali, the shakel chetzia b'shvua, and then after swearing, he would walk away with 50% of the object. So hachanami, the amar chetzia shali. So we shouldn't penalize him for being an honest man, right, and telling the truth, and saying that he only owns half because he's only a partner. Lishkol chetzi b'shvua. Why don't we just believe him? He's proven himself to be honest by virtue of the fact that he avoided, telling a big, more successful lie. Okay. So the Tosus Rid says, Ha lav milsahi. Number one, it doesn't work from a migu point of view. Dimkein maho alnu behoda aso. Right? Imkein hayahadin, ba'arma. What benefit does he have? Number one, he's saying a little bit your point about gaming the system. He's saying, listen, a typical migu, he puts himself in a worse position, even if you were to believe him, than his lie. But in this situation, what are we saying? He has a bigger lie, therefore believe him to the same effect as had he lied when he's making less of a claim. Why not? If that's the halakha, then why wouldn't he always just make the lesser claim? Right? If most migus, the claim that he makes is not just, even if you accept his claim, there's still a downside. Here, there's no downside once you accept this claim. So then in retrospect, turns out that the alternative, it is a bigger lie, but it's not a better lie. It's not a better claim because you're making this equal to that claim. That's number one. That's what he means by these words. The imkein maho alnu bahoda also. What's the benefit of his admitting imkein hayadin ba'arma ton kach shamar mihivianu lomar kulashali shaloy aminuli? Why should I, look like I'm a charlatan, making the bigger claim, that, the whole thing belongs to me? Better for me to be humble, and more not denying his rights, right? But I'm getting the same thing, same benefit anyway. Elavadai, Inzamigu, the Ezahu Migu. What is a Migu? Kol Mashi Yomar Huneman, right? Avozeh Im Yomar Kula Shali Enonemon. It's a less psychologically credible claim when that guy says the whole thing is mine, for you to say he has nothing at all, as opposed to saying, well, I mean, he's exaggerating, but there is something to what he's saying. the more moderate claim, again, we live in a funny time, right? So, now it's like, you just go for, the boldest and, the most outrageous claim. But mostly when people are in a dispute, a monetary dispute, the one who sounds like he's, more moderate in his argument, that's often more credible. Shalo yachsikuhu olam ramai hilchein kan migu. But then he says that's answer number one. Okay, that's a little bit like the gaming, idea. But then he says a different answer. V'ra'isi mitartzim lo amrina migu kiyim lahachzik biyado. V'lo lahotzi mechavero. So now he's quoting Tosas. Tosas said there is a migu here. The problem is migu never works to take away somebody else's, property. It only works to reinforce and to establish your claim over your own property. Says the Tosas Rid, nearly I don't think that's a good answer. Why? Shagam zelahachsiku. He's not taking away the other guy's quarter, half of the half. Shakachu machsik kachavero. He's holding on to half. The other guy's holding on to half. They're both holding on to together. That doesn't mean that each one's holding on exclusively to a quarter. It means that together they're holding on to the half. So he's trying to say the half is mine. The other guy's trying to say the half is mine. Each one is trying to be machzik b'shalo. Right? Ve'ima yomer kula shali, avishakol chetzi, ilule mipnei shahoda shachetzi ena shalo. And actually, he would have gotten a full half if he had made the other claim, which proves that his physical tfisa, is extended to at least to the half. So when he makes the claim that he's a partner and he's only entitled to half, but the physical tfisa is the same, who says that is motzi? That's machzik. And then he goes on and he explains other things. So what emerges from here is that the argument, number one, there's an argument about migu and the parameters of migu. That's very fascinating in its own right. Right? How does migu work? Migu de ha'aza, psychologically. What about migu de lahotzi? But there's another critical dimension here, and that is, even if you say migu lahotzi lo amrinan, right? When two people hold on to an object, do you consider each one to be the exclusive machzik on the half, and therefore anybody who wants to disrupt that is a motzi? Or since there really is a dispute, and it is one object, and we don't legally consider it to be two objects, so then whatever claim he makes to strengthen his own argument is never motzi, it's always machzik. Or if it isn't machzik, it certainly isn't motzi. So it comes out that the argument about migu, now I'm not going to show it now because I want to stop, but the Tosas Rid is of the opinion that in the earlier piece, that, let's look at it for 1 second. We have one more minute. The previous Tosas Rid works beautifully with this. He says, Shnai Mosim Batalis, Dafka Ochazin, only if they're both holding on. To keep do biyadam lo amrin and called alam gavar. You're not going to take it away from two people holding on and say, oh, fight it out. She'ein din sheno mar la'alim tkofet hachalash. Called alam gavar is not, we'll talk about this, it's not a ruling, right? We're not saying, oh, the law is you should fight it out. What we're saying is the law can't help you here, so we're disengaging. Whoever comes up with the object will keep the object for now. The Totzia Shabiyada Vitiskabo. Avalalo Yushneim Tfusim Kigon Demonach Besimta Kamayu, Umarivan Olav Arminan called Alam Gavar. He goes on to say that the reason Shnai Moxim Gatalis is not called Alam Gavar is not because each one is considered to be a full toe-face on half. It's because since between the two of them, it's in limbo, you never initiate called Alam Gavar. You don't take it away even from limbo. in order to say might makes right. The only time might makes right, and even then it doesn't make right. Might is just a way of moving forward, right? If Bezin disengages and they have nothing to say or no constructive way to solve the case, but somebody needs to end up with the object, so we say on an interim basis, whoever will grab it will keep it for now. We'll talk more about Kol Da'am Gav. But what you see from here is that the Tosas Rid, even though you require Shnei Moksim, which is more than the Riva, but like the Riva, he doesn't think that each one is Tofes Bevadai Bechetzi, as if there were two different objects. So that's why in the next piece, when it comes to applying the principle of Migo Lahotzi, the Tosas Rid, Lissitaso, consistently is the one who says, no, this isn't Lahotzi. Why is it Lahotzi? Neither one of them has full Tfisa on half. They both together have a Tfisa on the whole. So maybe that doesn't mean that there's no Tfisa, but it certainly doesn't, it certainly compromises the quality of each person's claim of a Tfisa vis-a-vis the other. So what we're seeing is that the argument of Shnei Moksim B'talas Yachloku, and whether we see it as a Vadai or a Safek, is really a very vibrant argument, and it has other echoes in the law as well. Okay, we'll stop here. I want to finish with the Rambam and the Ramban and the Rajba, and then I want to move on to Kol Da'am Gavar next time, and also the Shaklavataria going forward.
Okay, thank you so much, Rabbi. Looking forward to next week.
Thank you. Okay.